It's episode 19 of the Exit Philosophy podcast. That is Richard Griffin. Griff, I'm Scott MacArthur. You can also call me Scotty Mac, or you can call me asshole, whichever you prefer. And we know that some of you listening probably think that I am the south end of a northbound human being.
But not anyone who lives in Lloydminster, because that's where you were last Thursday, I believe, with John Gibbons and Scott Shannon. Tell us about it. Was it, you said it was the first time you'd been to either of those provinces.
Hold on. Are we allowed to talk about John Gibbons on this podcast? I know we had him as a guest a couple of weeks ago. I just want to make sure, Griff, that when we talk about authentic human beings who are true to their word, we're not violating any principles.
Anyone who's been on our show is we call friends of the show.
Yes. And we invented that.
Yeah, right.
Nobody else has ever said friend of the show ever. So this was awesome. Like, because we had Gibby on a couple weeks ago, and it was to talk ball and to relive some of the memories he had, but it was also in part a shameless self-promotion for both of us. So we went out west to Lloydminster, Alberta, Saskatchewan, because Lloydminster is a border town bordering those two provinces. And there's a photo I got of me actually with 1 foot in each province. There's actually a sidewalk in downtown Lloydminster that's right on the border. So you're able to go and take a photo. Got to spend 48 hours with Gibby and John Shannon, who you all know more recently as an on-air talent, but I don't think there's anybody who's been more important to hockey television production than John Shannon over the last 45 to 50 years. And we went to the Lloydminster Bobcats Junior A hockey team's annual fundraising banquet called the Evening of Champions. There were about 500 people in the convention center, and we had a great night. There was a live auction. There was a silent auction. The dinner, Griff, was incredible. As you would expect, like I live out here in Halifax right now, I can walk down the street and get some pretty good lobster. When you're in Alberta, you're trusting you're going to get some pretty good beef. I can tell you, the beef I had, that cow died a hero. That was an incredible dinner served, and over 3.5 or 4 hours, the team raised a bunch of money through its 2 different auctions. There were amazing bid items like Edmonton Oilers trips to see the Seattle Kraken in Seattle, and the next day you get to see the Seahawks play the Commanders. That's coming up on a weekend in November. And it was a chance for me also, aside from sort of running the event, to sit down and chat with John Shannon for 25 minutes. And obviously we focused on hockey, and in particular the Oilers. I learned very quickly that Lloydminster is Oilers country. It is not Flames country. And then we had Gibby up, and I think we must have talked for 35 or 40 minutes, and he told plenty of old war stories. Gibby really feels like a fit in that part of our country, and I think that was confirmed just based on the reception that he got and the laughs that we had. And so it was an awesome, awesome night. I had never been west of Dryden, Ontario in our country. Been all over the United States, but never been west of Dryden, Ontario in our country until I set foot in the Calgary airport to stop over ahead of a quick prop jet flight to Lloydminster on Wednesday afternoon. So very cool for me.
I saw the photo of you with one leg in Saskatchewan and one leg in Alberta. How I mean, it sounds like Bluefield, where the Blue Jays used to have their low A team, which was you could run back in the outfield and be in another state. I think it was Virginia and the West Virginia, maybe.
Virginia.
Yeah. So how was that? That must have been cool.
Yeah, it was really awesome. You know, it's funny, and I told the crowd this because I got a couple of minutes to introduce myself. I figured, you know, they know who John Shannon is. They know who John Gibbons is. Who the hell is this guy with long hair? So I turned heel right away, and I made a Leaf joke, and I said that I'm from Toronto, but I did say, and I meant this, there's prairie in my soul because my mom's parents were born and raised in Regina. And my dad's parents, one was born in Winnipeg, the other in Toronto, but both were raised in Winnipeg. So to get out there and hang out, and also really good for me to talk to people with a different view of the world than the one that I have. And it was funny. We didn't argue. We just sort of shot the breeze. And the one thing I came away from, aside from the fun that I had and getting to hang out with Gibby and John Shannon and Jamie Walker, who was one of the organizers of this event and the one who really was our point person, and he was great. He toured us around. The one thing I really learned is there's a lot of value in traveling the country and talking to people who live different types of lives and have different types of points of view based on the lives that they live. And I would argue that that is good for people like me from Ontario, living in Halifax now. It would also be good for people from the West to come east and all of that. We got to get off Twitter and we got to see each other face to face more because we're all just the same at the end of the day.
So are you now have Mike Will Travel? Do you have business cards where someone can call you and pay your expenses and give you a fee and you will come and host their banquet? Is that a career that you're going to espouse?
I'll tell you what, right now, if you want me to come and host your event, if you want me to say words, don't expect me to do much thinking. But if you want me to come and say words, I would be happy to come and host your event. I had a blast. I've had an opportunity to do a few of those things, not many, Griff, through the years, but a few of them. And they're always fun. And being there in Lloyd last Thursday night, well, being there for 48 hours, but being in Lloyd for the event Thursday night was really, really cool. It's a great part of our country.
So we are recording Exit Philosophy episode 19 on Monday morning, September 11th. And far be it from us to move on without acknowledging the history of 9/11. And just, Scotty, where do you remember? I know you were much younger, but do you remember where you were on that morning of 9/11, 2001?
Yeah, I'll try to keep this brief, Griff, because I know your experience was tied to baseball, whereas I was still in college. So I was at Algonquin College in Ottawa, starting really maybe second or third week of my second and final year of that program. And what I remember is that I was one of 6 group leaders who had been called into school. Well, not called in, but it had been planned for a couple of days that we were to wake up early in the morning of September the 11th to sit with one of our teachers all morning to listen to the entirety of the Oldies 1310 morning show. Because the assignment was, we were each given a radio station in Ottawa, and we, as a group, had to mark down everything with time checks that we heard. The song that played lasted 3 minutes and 31 seconds, followed by the announcer talking for 20 seconds, then a 5-minute commercial break, like itemized minute by minute. And so the group leaders came in to do a mock run with our teacher so that we understood what the assignment was and could then take it back to our groups and say, here's what we need to do on assignment day. And he said, here's what I'll do. We'll listen to the Oldies 1310 morning show, which ends at 9 a.m., and then I'll take you to the staff lounge and buy all 6 of you breakfast. So we did that assignment, or we did the mock assignment with our teacher, and then at 9 in the morning, we went to breakfast in the staff lounge, and that lasted for about 45 minutes or so. And then we returned to the radio broadcasting area where our classrooms were as well. And when the 6 of us students, the group leaders, walked into the classroom where there was a TV, the entirety of the rest of our class, 36 people, were in a half moon shape, transfixed by what they were seeing on television. And of course, the attacks on the World Trade Center had happened by then. The two towers had not yet come down, but the planes had flown into the buildings. And it was really weird what you say in a moment like that, or what people remember you saying. But my best friend in college is a Newfoundlander named Brad McDonald, who's actually a morning show host in St. John's to this day. And he goes by the name Brad Michaels. And he told me years later, he said, Scott, you turned to me. Because he was also one of the group leaders. So he had breakfast as well with our teacher. He said, you turned to me and you had this look in your eyes and you just said, this isn't good. And just 3 words, nothing profound, but like, I don't even really remember saying it, but just really like, oh my God. And our world changed that day, Griff. So that's what I remember. I would imagine, and I don't even remember where the Blue Jays were. Were they home? Were they away? And if they were away, were you on the road with them covering the team for the Star at the time? Where were you, and what do you remember about September 11th, 2001?
Yeah, I got a lot of memories. I remember I had a flight scheduled to go to Baltimore and join the Blue Jays. Joined the Blue Jays at that point. But I dropped the kids off at St. Bernadette's Elementary School and came home, and I'm reading the paper on the sofa, and I'm watching CNN, and they're talking about a small plane that has flown into one of the towers. And as the broadcaster, as the host is talking about that incident, the second plane is behind him flying into the tower. So I'm watching it live. I'm watching it happen live. And I did not move from that sofa for 18 hours. The Star put out a special edition, and they asked anyone who worked for the paper to come down and help distribute, help produce. And I could not move from that sofa. And that showed me that I wasn't a real journalist. I was a sports writer. You know, I was a baseball writer. I was a former baseball PR person. Like I said, I remember I was going to Baltimore, didn't go, obviously, as all flights were canceled. Jeff Baker was down there at a time when we used to travel 2 people on the road for the Blue Jays. And so he always went the night before a series started, and I would go in the morning of, because family considerations. But he was in Baltimore, and when the planes hit, and then the attack on the Pentagon, this is unbelievable in this day and age, but I remember that he rented a car. It was the last car available from Avis, drove down to the Pentagon and got right up to the incident using his Baseball Writers Association card. That was the only ID he had. Yep. And for that to happen, that is the last time that any news event was recognizing a BBWAA card, because sometimes we can't even get in clubhouses nowadays with a BBWAA card.
Yeah. But
I remember with the Expos, we landed once at LaGuardia and found out that the buses were waiting at Kennedy. So the charter had to take off, and the charter took off and did a swing around the Twin Towers. This is in the early 90s. And we were so close that I could look in offices and see the lights on and see the desks, see the filing cabinets. And for years, I made jokes about how we flew between the Twin Towers like a field goal. And of course, that resonated when the attacks happened. And of course, I never made that joke again. I remember staying at the World Trade Center Marriott in 2000 for the playoffs and World Series, because it was Mets Yankees, and every round ended up being in New York. So you're constantly changing hotels in New York, and staying on a weekend at the Trade Center Marriott, and going through deserted hallways of the World Trade Center, and going through the overhead to have lunch and watch some NFL on a Sunday afternoon before a Sunday night game at Yankee Stadium. And that the fact of the empty hallways and the empty buildings still resonates with me. And as an aside, I found receipts from the World Trade Center Marriott 2 years later, and I went, I guess I won't be using these because it no longer existed, and none of that existed anymore. And I remember watching George W. Bush, who I was not one of my favorite people, throw out the first pitch at that World Series game. I got goosebumps.
Yeah,
because that's one of those memories that I probably won't ever forget. And the changes in airport security, kids growing up today don't realize how easy it was before that. And you know, in New York, they wouldn't even, in the year and a half after, they wouldn't let you into any restaurant, bar, establishment if you're carrying a briefcase. And of course, we did all the time covering baseball. So, I mean, just the subtle changes that have happened since then and the giant memories that I continue to have and that still resonate. So we do remember, we will remember, and we still pray for all the people that died.
Yeah, it's a day the world changed, and not for the better, very sadly. And one last thought, my aunt was in San Francisco on a vacation, and so it's 3 hours earlier out there, very early in the morning, and there was panic. And for context of that time, and if you are old enough to remember, you will remember this. It's always interesting looking back on something in hindsight and then try to remember what it was like going through it. So when the two planes hit the two towers in New York and the attack on the Pentagon, and then we got word that another plane had gone down in Pennsylvania because the passengers had heroically stopped the terrorists, none of us knew whether it was over, whether there were more targets, whether Los Angeles was next, or Chicago, or San Francisco, or Dallas, like you name it. Like when you're living it at the time, we can look back on it now in totality and see what it was. But when you're living through it at the time, Griff, you have no idea whether there's more to come, and if so, how much. And it's paralyzing. And I was 22 when it happened, and it really helped to frame my worldview for a good period of time.
That's why the movie and the play, I think, Come From Away, where all the planes landed in Newfoundland.
Yeah,
those discussions, those conversations of the passengers recreated is what everyone was having. So you can watch that and go, well, you know, had nothing to do with us. It had everything to do with us because we were all talking the same way. Nobody knew anything. And there's probably still a lot that we have not heard about from those days, but living through it was a life experience that nobody will forget. Anyway, let's move on to the Jays and the Royals series.
Well, I was gonna do something first, Griff, because I didn't do it out of the gate.
Oh, okay.
And your son Pat is the one who keeps us organized. And so, Pat, this is for you, pal. You can get all of Griff's work. I'm just watching you smile because I Griff, I didn't write a script, but I think I describe it like the same way.
Yeah, you
every
do.
time,
word for word.
It's like passing wind for me. Like I just do it. I just do it. But you can get well, maybe some of Griff's work is something you read while you're sitting passing wind. I mean, for all we know, but you can get it at griffsthepitch.com. Griffsthepitch.com is Rich's website. Multiple weekly Blue Jays and MLB columns. You get a weekly MLB power rankings column, really important this time of year. Griff talks to some of the game's current greats and former greats. There's a heavy focus on the Blue Jays, past and present, and on the Montreal Expos. He had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with Steve Rogers. That and more is there. A couple of months ago, he talked to Moises Alou. They're all archived. griffsthepitch.com. And you can also get Exit Philosophy, the podcast you're listening to right now, linked to griffsthepitch.com. If you're listening to us, you should know you can look at our ugly mugs as we talk if you want. We are at youtube.com/exit philosophy. If you're watching us on YouTube and you also have access to podcasts through your smartphone, which most of us do now, we are on Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcasts. And so without further ado, 10-5, Griff, through the cream puff part of the schedule. 10-5 through the cream puff part of the schedule. The Blue Jays, as we sit here today on Monday morning, September the 11th, 2023, are in the second American League wildcard spot. So as exciting as that sounds, they would go to Tampa Bay for a best-of-3 road wildcard playoff series if the playoffs started today. There's been some movement in the American League West as we sit here this morning. The Astros and Mariners are tied, or I should say the Astros and Mariners are atop the division with Texas sitting third. Houston has kind of pulled away with a 2.5-game lead on the Mariners. The Mariners are the third wildcard team. Texas a half game back of Seattle and 1.5 back of the Blue Jays. So there is a slight cushion for Toronto with Texas coming in, Griff. We sat here last week and said, take care of Oakland because Houston's playing Texas. You'll gain a game on somebody each day if you do. And the Jays took 2 out of 3. They got the job done against the Royals all weekend long. And now all of a sudden, despite their warts and their flaws, with Texas coming in, they're sitting pretty. A split at minimum this week. Better than that, and we start talking really confidently about a playoff spot.
Yeah, the Jays have found themselves now in a respectable position to anticipate going ahead. But as you said, a split would be essential. The thing working for the Jays in this wild card race is the fact that they have 4 games against Texas. They need to take care of business with at least a split. But then there's 20 games on the schedule, so the 10 losses to be handed out intramural among the AL West teams. So one of those 3 teams is going to win the division, so the Jays would not have to worry about that team. And then 2 others will be fighting for wild card with the Blue Jays, because Tampa Bay, we're anticipating, is going to be the number 1 wild card. So there's, with 10 losses to be distributed, the Blue Jays are in a pretty good position as long as they at least split with the Rangers. And, you know, you talked earlier about the 10-5 record in the 15 soft games, the 5 series against below 500 teams. Those were 4 of the 5 worst teams in baseball. So somehow Exit Philosophy for weeks before that series had been talking about the necessity of a 10-5 15-game stretch. But somehow the 10-5 does not seem satisfying, because even John Schneider admits that they left wins on the table. They left wins out there. And sometimes we didn't realize how bad those teams actually were. And to go into Denver and leave a game, leave a loss to the Rockies, and to lose 2 out of 3 to Cleveland, and to have a home stretch with those teams where they were only 3-3 in 2 consecutive series before going on that road trip against bad teams. Just the 10-5 does not seem as satisfying as I thought when we were projecting it.
Well, so the one in Colorado in particular, because so very rarely have the Blue Jays scored 5 in the first. And when they do, you expect they'll win, and that night they didn't. The Rockies stormed all the way back, won that game. But that's too much of a digression at this point. It happened more than a week ago. I think, Griff, 10-5, because you can't account for what else is going to happen. I mean, Texas has essentially crapped in its diaper and had that leak down their legs. I mean, they have fallen apart here. And so, you know, they're coming in vulnerable. They're also coming in desperate. What I love about this being a 4-game series is that if one team, be it the Blue Jays or the Rangers, wins this series, they're gaining 2 games minimum on their opponent. You're either splitting and it's a saw-off, or you win 3 of 4 and gain 2, sweep and gain 4, or you lose 3 of 4 and lose 2, which would put the Blue Jays behind the Rangers if that happened by a half game, or you get swept and then you're really in the, to quote that umpire with Terry Collins, then the ass is in the jackpot. So like this is a swing series. There's no like half-ass measures here. You're not gaining or losing a game. It's either a split or a gain or loss of 2, on and on. This is it, Griff. If they have a good week, they're in the playoffs.
Yeah, the thing about winning 3 out of 4 in the series, and they could still lose Monday night and win 3 out of 4 as we're recording Monday morning. But if they win 3 out of 4, they, as you said, they gain 2 games on the Rangers, and then also win the season series and therefore have a tiebreaker if they finish it with the same win total. So it becomes even more important. It adds an additional game. So if they, let's say our target number of 91 wins, if they both finish with 91 wins and the Jays don't win 3 out of 4, then Texas gets the spot. If the Jays win 3 out of 4 and they both get 91 wins, then the Jays get. So it's very important to win the series. But a split would have to, because the Rangers 4-man rotation for the series looks pretty good. And as we know, the Jays have not responded well early in games, except the one game they lost by scoring 5 runs in the first. So maybe a 6-pitch first inning is the key to Jays victory, in that they don't do anything for the first 2 or 3 innings and then scrape out some runs. But one thing that I did mention to John Schneider a couple of days ago is, and we've discussed it on Exit Philosophy before, is that if the Jays score 5 runs with the pitching that they have, the starting pitching and the bullpen, that 5 runs should be the bar that they set for an opponent to beat them. And it's been, in the last 14 games, they've scored 5+ runs in 12 of those, and that corresponds to the drive that they've had. So let's look at 5 runs as the bar to set, and 91 wins as the bar to reach. And if they do both those things, I believe that they won't be the 3rd wild card. The way that those other teams have stumbled, I wouldn't say collapsed, but stumbled, the Jays would be 2nd wild card, will concede Tampa the 1st, and the Orioles the division, even though they're on fumes.
Well, Griff, if Texas misses the playoffs, it's a collapse. I mean, maybe it's a stumble right now on September 11th, but it's a collapse. I mean, they led the division for most of the season.
They led by 3.5 games late into August. So,
right.
Yeah.
And they were atop the division.
Coming out of the trade deadline, when they got Scherzer and they got the package from the Cardinals,
yep,
they won a bunch of games in a row, and everybody thought this division is theirs. They've added strength to what was already a strength. They've made up for injuries to the starting rotation, Eovaldi, and all of a sudden they've lost 16 of the last 21 games.
And meanwhile, the Mariners traded their closer, Paul Sewald, to the Diamondbacks and ripped off an unbelievable 3-week stretch that got them back for a period of time at the top of the division. And but isn't it funny as you look at the American League West, the defending world champion Houston Astros, who have underperformed based on reputation, and I would argue expectation, this year to date, now all of a sudden are in first place when it counts and have a 2.5 game lead when it counts. Went to Dallas or Arlington. Stadium was packed. I'm sure a lot of Astros fans, at least based on the highlights I saw, a lot of Astros fans traveled north, and they had a series where they ripped the top off of that new stadium in Arlington and took care of business. There's the team with the experience getting it done, and the talent getting it done when it counts.
And I must take a moment here to criticize Blue Jays fans and Blue Jays media that point out, well, they're 10-5, but against 5 teams that are not very good, that are bad teams. In the schedule, the way it is constructed for 2023, every team plays every team. And so the fact that the Jays late in the season had that stretch of 5 series in a row, those are the same teams that other contenders have played either in the past or, and look at the 3 teams in the AL West that are contending. They have Oakland at the bottom of that division, losing 100 games. And so they play more games against Oakland than they play against anybody else. And the Jays at the bottom of the AL East have the Yankees, who, you know, despite going young, despite looking ahead to 2024, are still pretty dangerous. And the Jays have 6 games against them. And even though they're not contending, won't be going to the postseason, that's not a pushover series. And so, like, fans who say that, well, the Jays took advantage and now they're into a tough stretch of the schedule, everybody plays everybody. And so you play the game, you play the teams on your schedule, and you just let the chips fall where they might.
To say nothing of the fact that the Angels don't have Ohtani pitching and released a town's worth of human beings over the last couple of weeks, right? Including a lot of the guys that they acquired at the trade deadline when they decided to go for it, when Ohtani was still pitching and they were going to try to make a push for the playoffs down the stretch, and it didn't work out. So that's another American League West team on the schedule in the final 2 weeks of the season for the teams at the top who will see the Angels again to maybe mash on, right?
There's one point, especially with this Blue Jays sweep of the Royals, I'd like to get your opinion on, because I have, as you know, opinions on everything. And that is...
Don't get yourself in trouble, Griff.
That is the fact of the Cole Reagans. He's the best pitcher they've got. He's a pitcher for the future. I don't know how the Rangers could have traded him in the Aroldis Chapman deal. Chapman for less than a half a season. And since they got him, their bullpen has gone for shit.
Although Chapman's been okay. Chapman's been pretty good.
Chapman's been okay. It's just surrounding and symbolic.
Yes.
They get him and their bullpen just collapses.
Yeah.
But my question to you is, what is your belief level in the kids from Buffalo, and were they lucky that the Blue Jays were playing that stretch of 15 games when John Schneider and the team needed that sort of help from the minor leagues? And are they going to be significant down the stretch in the last 19 when the opponents get tougher?
Davis Schneider needs to play, right? Davis Schneider needs to play.
I'm asking you.
Davis Schneider needs to play. That is the statement I will make. Bo Bichette's back, and it's a huge deal that he's back. And Eric Swanson is going to be back tonight, is our understanding. And so that's going to round out the bullpen. And our understanding is that Matt Chapman is very close from coming back from this finger issue. And then you look around and you say to yourself, this is the team we built. I mean, knock on wood, and you can't see it, Griff, but I am propped up here at a wooden table, so I am legitimately knocking on wood. Knock on wood that nobody else gets hurt, and if they do, it's a nick that costs them a day or two, and nothing more than that. But then you can just say, well, this is the group we've put together, and let's go see how we fare down the stretch against a couple of opponents, and then onward. With regard to the Ernie Clements of the world, and I know McCoy's gone back, but those types of guys, they've come in and they have done the job. Now, if they had done a 15-game run through Baltimore and Tampa Bay and Houston, I think, honestly, Griff, the answer to that question, and in terms of whether it's lucky that they didn't have to play those teams and played weaker teams, the answer to that question is buried in one of your responses earlier, which is you play the teams on your schedule when they come up. And Mark Shapiro and Ross Atkins didn't sit down at the start of the year and say, here's the part of the schedule that would be really good for Bo Bichette to get injured if he has to get hurt. If it has to happen, it better be in late August, early September. If Matt Chapman has to get hurt, it better be late August, early September, when we got Washington and Colorado and Oakland and Kansas City, blah, 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 blah. It just so happened that it fared that way. So you can make the argument that they got lucky it happened at this time of year, but you play who's on your schedule when those teams on your schedule come up, and you trust that the 26, or in this case 28, that you have will get the job done on more nights than not. So I don't really see it as a luck thing. I see it more as a coincidental thing where a couple of key players got hurt while they were playing a lesser part of their schedule. And because it was a lesser part of their schedule, it allowed for a little more room for error, and they were able to take care of business to the tune of winning 2 out of 3 over a 15-game stretch.
Agreed about the schedule is what the schedule is, and you play who's on it. But the luck definitely was there, and nobody anticipated that we'll sit Bo for 12 games and then we'll bring Ernie Clement and Mason McCoy and those guys in. But the bottom line is fans are believing that these guys should be playing down the stretch. And watching these guys play, Ernie Clement cannot make the throw from the hole. And there's a lot of ball. And then without Matt Chapman at third, you've got a third baseman who's obviously lesser defensively because Matt Chapman is a Gold Glover, even though his defense this season has been a little less than it was last and in the past. But you need Matt Chapman at third base. You don't need Kevin Biggio, even though Kevin Biggio has played a really good third base and started to swing the bat. And Santiago Espinal is swinging the bat better. I think he got a jolt from his failures in 2 big situations, in 2 big game situations, and maybe shook himself and said, I got to be better than that. And he has been better than that. But Ernie Clement cannot play shortstop on a championship team. Davis Schneider needs to be replaced in the 8th and 9th inning with a lead defensively. And luckily there is personnel, and John Schneider has gotten used to that, bring Whit Merrifield into play second and put Varsho in and have Kiermaier in center field. So they have the personnel to move it around, but Davis Schneider moving forward had better get better defensively because he's below average second baseman in terms of instincts and ability. And so, yeah, it's wonderful they're 10-5, and maybe that's the reason they were only 10-5 instead of 12-3 is that they were playing with secondary personnel. But down the stretch, they need Bo to be out there every day. Bo comes back and he plays 1 game at shortstop and then sits the next day. And I'm going like, there's 21 games left in the season, and Bo comes back healthy and he has a really good game, and you sit him the next day. That's crazy.
Well, he didn't have the opportunity to go down to the minor leagues and check an important box
or enter the game, enter an inning
one,
in the middle of an inning.
Well, we need Bo Bichette to enter a game in the 4th inning and show us he can finish it. No, I mean, but let's use Matt Chapman as the example. If you're listening or watching us right now and you are of the opinion that Matt Chapman should sit in favor of one of the young kids, aside from the hallucinogenic illogic of that argument, let's take it from an actual business point of view. We know who Matt Chapman's agent is. His name is Scott Boras. We know that Matt Chapman is a free agent in 2 months from now. Can you imagine? This is not going to happen, so we don't even have to worry about experiencing it. But can you imagine what would happen if Matt Chapman returned from the injured list and sat on the bench in favor of one of these young kids while the Blue Jays completed the stretch drive and probably went into the playoffs? Impending free agency, Scott Boras, his agent. Do you want to do business with Scott Boras and Scott Boras's clients down the road? I mean, I will say one thing for Mark Shapiro. He's brought Scott Boras's business back north of the border, because that wasn't happening for 2 decades. And Scott Boras has some pretty good players. So, this isn't going to happen. So we don't need to waste any more time on this, Griff, other than your response to my hypothetical scenario. But you got to think beyond just I've fallen in love with this guy, Clement or whoever, because he got a couple of big hits as a replacement player for the starter who's out at a particular position for a week and a half. Like Matt Chapman, however we feel about his offense this year, and maybe his offense in general in 2 years as a Blue Jay, the defense at third is still strong. Maybe not peak Matt Chapman, but it's still strong. There's no argument to be made for not playing Matt Chapman when he returns. I mean, honestly.
The argument that you made about Scott Boras and the relationship that a major league team has to have with an agent, a super agent, the best agent in history, who has a stable of players that any team could use, that we've already seen that in 2023 with Hyun-Jin Ryu, who could easily, with many organizations, if he was not who he was and have the agent Scott Boras that he has, they could easily have said, well, he's rehabbing and he wasn't as good as we had hoped in 2022. So we're just going to send him to the minor leagues on injury rehab and have him finish the season there. But they did everything. The Blue Jays did everything they could to get Ryu back in the rotation. He worked very hard himself. He did a tremendous job of rehabilitating his Tommy John surgery, and he is now contributing in the rotation. And that's something that they didn't need to do. He didn't need to do, but it's all part of a continuing and ongoing and future relationship with important people in the business. And Scott Boras is one of those. Ryu will get a new contract with somebody. I'm not sure whether it will be with the Blue Jays, but it has worked out for everyone in that situation. But the point is that what you said earlier is absolutely correct about Matt Chapman and third base. And as soon as he's ready to go, he's back in there, come hell or high water.
Yeah. And I'm not even making the business argument. I was just,
but you did mention Scott Boras as a fact.
No, but I'm not making the business argument because I'm taking it one step further just by bringing that up. I'm saying there's no logic. There's no logic. Business aside, there's no logic to Matt Chapman not playing.
Right. And we're not saying here that those young players and young players, Davis Schneider is 2 months older than Vlad. So when we say young players, it's all in terms of experience.
Yep.
But we're not saying those young players don't have a role, but they don't have a starting role. And watching John Schneider manage a team where parts are movable has been really probably good for him to be able to look ahead and see who he needs in the field and pinch run in a certain situation where it could have been dicey. Like in the Royal Series, he pinch ran for Alejandro Kirk when it was a tie game, but he knew that he was going to be putting Varsho in defensively, so he ran Varsho for Kirk and put him in defensively in left field. Kiermaier was already in center. Merrifield moved to second, and Schneider was out of the game. I think he ran for Schneider in that situation. But he's managing a team with multiple moving parts that are all about the same. But when your stars are ready to go, your stars got to play. But that leaves you with a versatile, useful bench, which there are times over the last couple of years the Blue Jays have not had.
In a surprise twist, Griff, I didn't get a degree in kinesiology, but I'm going to mention this anyway. Are we not at a point in the regular season where, and you brought it up with Bo, comes back, he plays, and then he sits the next day. Are we not at a point where guys can go out there every day? And the reason I mention that is that with Danny Jansen having had the surgery on his finger and now on the shelf for the rest of the regular season, there's no scenario in which both catchers are going to be in the lineup in the same game, right? Like, because you catch Danny, DH Kirk, or vice versa. Given Davis Schneider's defensive shortcomings, but my desire for his bat to be in the lineup, can he carry minimum 4 or 5 games a week in the DH spot as long as he continues to hit for the final 2.5, 3 weeks of the season? Like Bo can be at short every day. Vladdy can be at first every day.
Yeah, I could see a scenario with Brandon Belt once he gets over the runs or whatever he's got, that he and Davis Schneider could platoon at DH.
Platoon? Yeah, like,
and I agree. Like Bo, nobody appreciated Bo's defense until watching a week of Ernie Clements or Clement.
Yeah.
And then Bo
and Paul DeYoung before that
him in there, and yeah, well, Paul DeYoung was, I don't know,
Paul DeOld.
He's making a mark for himself in the Bay Area out in San Francisco. He's hitting 199 with 1 homer, which we saw in his first game, and 5 RBIs, no walks, and 16 strikeouts. That's what you want playing shortstop every day. What a fall from grace that was in St. Louis for Paul DeYoung.
He's good. Griff, this might be the last year of his career. I mean, he might get a minor league contract next year with an invite to spring training, but this could be it for him at the biggest level, highest level.
At this stage of his career, all I can say is that he's no Davis Schneider.
He's no Davis Schneider. I'm still waiting for the hot dog endorsement, but maybe we got to wait. We got to wait till next year at least for that to happen. But then I'm thinking, Griff, you don't let the young kids have too much too soon, right?
But in terms of the DH platoon, I mean, the reason that Brandon Belt was beginning to platoon against certain left-handed pitchers, even though he's a left-handed hitter and struggles at times, is that he gave you professional at bats. He took pitches that were just off the corner. Sometimes he get called on a pitch that was outside the corner, but that you're looking for professional at bats. He saw 5 or 6 pitches every at bat, every plate appearance. But from the right side, Davis Schneider does the same thing. So you're not losing anything, and you're keeping Davis Schneider in the lineup, and you're allowing Brandon Belt to play the majority of games as DH because there's more right-handed starters than left-handed starters. But you're also keeping the point of this, keeping your best players on the field, first base, and Vlad again. I think Vlad, when they say a guy in a hitting slump doesn't take it to the field with him, I think Vlad took it to the field with him when he wasn't performing, because you saw plays that scoops at first base that he normally makes that he didn't make when he was slumping. And now he's like a kid chasing a dog chasing a Frisbee right now. I mean, every play, he's joyful out there, and it's because he's swinging the bat better. He's giving professional at bats. He knows that he's pleasing the fans and pleasing himself. And he takes that to the field instead of taking a hangdog to the field, and it's showing up on certain plays. And you got to have him out there every day, and you got to have Bo at shortstop every day.
And I know you're big on the idea of the Blue Jays going on a deep playoff run because of their rotation and the depth in their bullpen pitching in general. I think this is Bo Bichette's team, but I will add, I don't think much happens in October unless Vladdy continues to swing the stick.
I asked John Schneider if there was an identity factor to have, if he was going to continue to keep having Bo and Vlad hit back to back, because to me, there's an identity factor for the Blue Jays when Bo is followed by Vlad and not separated by Brandon Belt or Davis Schneider or anyone. And John Schneider agreed. He agreed that will likely be, and of course, the day I asked him was the day that Bo sat. So that didn't work out. But the rest of the season, it should be 2 Bo, 3 Vlad. And he's already said that leadoff now belongs to George Springer now that George is swinging the bat. And George has responded after his 0 for 35 stretch. And back at the top of the lineup, he is playing like a kid again. So, your top 3 in the batting order, if that's what it is, at least puts a little fear into an opponent, into an opposing pitcher.
Isn't it funny? Like we always say how long the baseball season is. And isn't it funny how you go through all of these stretches of the year and yet everything reverts? Springer 1, Bo 2, Vlad 3. And if you were drawing up the lineup coming out of spring training, that's where you'd have them.
I got a question that tweaked me on when you were just talking about the strength of this team in October. And the question is, the starting pitching and the depth of the bullpen are going to be great in any series, short or long, but you have to cut back your 5-man rotation to 4 in the postseason because there's off days between games 2 and 3 and games 5 and 6. So you only need 4 starters. In your opinion, which of the 5 Blue Jays starters would be shifted to the bullpen? And obviously it would be Bowden, Francis that would be bumped.
Well, okay, so you want to skip right past the best of 3?
Yeah. Well, but you still only need 3 starters.
Well, no, I know, but like best of 3, Griff, I just know how these guys think because we saw it with Ryu in 2020.
It depends if they need to win those last games on that final weekend.
No, but that's fair. But Gausman, if they can line it up, Gausman's going to start game 2, right? They've shown us that.
Well, before on the going through the 5-man rotation right to the end, Gausman would be pitching on the final Sunday. So if they don't need that game, then he's fresh for the postseason.
And I would argue he's their ace. We know that. So he will start game 2 because they did that with Ryu in Tampa Bay in 2020. It didn't go well, but remember they started Matt Shoemaker in game 1 and then went to Robbie Ray. And they had Ryu because it was either a clinching game or an elimination game. So I would imagine they'll do that with Gausman. And then
so do you go
for me?
You go Bassett game 1?
I go Bassett in game 1.
Bassett, Gausman, and
Barrios.
It all comes down to Barrios was dealing.
It's Barrios. Griff,
96, 97, and he seemed to be way more confident, and he went through 7, and he did that easily against the Royals on Sunday. So
and Barrios has started elimination games before. I think he pitched for the Twins. Help me with the year because was it 17 or 18? But they didn't win, but they went to Yankee Stadium when it was still a 1-game wild card, and he's pitched under the bright lights. And it isn't just that. Like Kikuchi's been very good this year, and to his credit, I just think there is the possibility of a nuclear meltdown there in a high pressure spot. I'd say. I'm not saying it's likely, although maybe I am, but I'm not saying it's likely. I'm saying it's more likely, in my view, than someone else having it. And if you go to a best of 5 or 7 and require 4, whoever's available to start game 1 based on how the best of 3 series goes. But if all things being equal, to me, Gausman's your 1. Barrios is my 2, available or not. Of course, you schedule things based on availability, but perfect world. Gausman's my 1, Barrios is my 2, Bassett's my 3, and then you sneak a Ryu start in there, and you have Kikuchi in game 4, and you have Kikuchi available. Probably not every game coming out of the pen. It's a big adjustment, but you have him maybe as a backload guy. I know he comes from the same side as Ryu, but he throws a different game than Ryu. Like that's where my head is on that.
My thought is that
or does Ryu get kept off the roster? But I don't think you can do that with a Boris client.
No, my thought is
going into free agency.
That there have been sort of warning signs with Kikuchi his last 4 starts, and the fact that in his last 2 seasons, his second halves have stumbled.
Yep.
We won't say collapse because you don't like the word collapse. No, I like the word collapse. I like the word stumble. So I'm going to say stumble.
Right.
But Kikuchi has stumbled. Kikuchi had experience last year pitching out of the pen and was dynamic, pitching multiple innings out of the pen. Ryu cannot pitch out of the pen, so either has to be left off the roster, which won't happen, or be the 4th starter. Because he takes 24 hours. He literally, having been in that clubhouse, he literally takes 24 hours to get ready for a start. He doesn't just put on his uniform and go out on the field and toss long and then go to the pen and warm up. He needs to be stretched out. He needs the day before to be stretched out and watch video the day before. And then, so you can't do that coming out of the bullpen. Well, and so Kikuchi is the guy with the experience, with the dynamic stuff. And I'm not sure you want a guy throwing 89 miles an hour fastball with a loopy curveball coming in as your first reliever out of the pen to throw multiple innings. Right. And what you said, if Ryu goes in and gives you 4 innings and keeps you in a ball game, you still have Kikuchi to come in. And even though they're both left-handed, so what? I mean, right-handers come in for right-handers all the time. That's a tradition. That's every day. So just because they're left-handed doesn't mean you can't come in for a left-hander, even though the lineup might be loaded with right-handed hitters. But that is what they have to do. And Kikuchi, God bless him, was so good in the first half. He saved the club because Manoah was struggling and continued to struggle and is still struggling with more than just pitching. And we assume. And so that's the way it's got to be in the postseason. And we agree on that for pretty much the same reasons.
George Kirby, Seattle Mariners, is getting roasted on a spit for post-game comments after his last start, in which he, and I'm going to paraphrase here, had thrown 90 pitches-ish through 6 innings, and therefore should not have come out in the 7th inning. So he thought his night should be done because he had thrown 90-ish pitches through 6 innings. And there are a lot of people in and around the game, Griff, who are absolutely roasting this guy. And I'm wondering, are they roasting him for going so blatantly public with it? Or are they roasting him for simply having that attitude, whether it's expressed publicly or not? Where do you come down on this? I've got my thoughts. Now, keep in mind, George Kirby is not arbitration eligible, very young pitcher, not arbitration eligible until after the end of next season. That would be the earliest ARB eligibility, and is not a free agent until after the 2028 season comes to an end.
To me, this is a case where the Emperor, in this case, the third starter, has no clothes. He was expecting to come out, and all he has done is expose the reality to the baseball world. I blame this on the pitching coach and the manager for not letting him know right away, you're going back out there. You're going back out there. I've seen way too many pitchers in this day and age. I mean, really, you don't need to know how to be a starting pitcher. Starting pitchers to me over the years were guys who, after the first 2 times through the order, would sit with the catcher and they would adjust and change the approach to the same hitters the 3rd and 4th time through the order until they had reached the end of the game or the end of their, until they brought in a reliever in the 8th or 9th inning. But these days in the minor leagues, they piggyback kids. They don't make them throw more than 90 pitches. And too often you watch a pitcher in the 6th inning and he's looking over his shoulder to the bullpen, hoping that somebody is warming up, hoping that somebody's going to come in and save his ass if he's got multiple runners on base and his pitch count is up there. You never used to see that. And it's, call it like an ancient view of pitching, but it is the view that we grew up with and that this George Kirby did not grow up with. And for him to say it is embarrassing to himself, but also a reflection that maybe they didn't handle it properly in the dugout with the manager and the pitching coach, and somebody should be held to account. But it's sad that this is the modern reality in baseball and starting pitching.
So when I say this, it's going to sound like I'm on George Kirby's side, and I'm not. But I agree with what you said. These guys have been conditioned that this is now how it is. He doesn't know any better. I'll take it a step further. I'm on a business track mind today, Griff, and I have no idea why, but when you spent now, so here's the interesting thing. Because a player in the corporation, if you envision it this way, in the corporation that is a Major League Baseball franchise, a player is a member of the rank and file. He is a worker. He's not the CEO. He's not, you understand, it's different in baseball. There's a lot of money, players, I get it. Okay, all of that. But when you have been shown repeatedly, growing up as a fan, aspiring to be a big league pitcher, then you get drafted, and he was a high pick, and you go through the minor leagues, you come up, you make your major league debut, you are now thinking about money, and you aren't looking to throw 115 pitches if it's going to take you 20 to 25 pitches in that seventh inning to jump you from 90-ish to 110 to 115-ish. You're not looking to put those extra miles on your arm because you're controllable still and you're pre-arbitration eligible and you haven't set yourself up for life yet. And these big league teams, we know that there's been some finagling to try to get them away from doing this, but these big league teams through the decades have shown players that they'll manipulate their service time, that they'll hold them down for a couple of weeks at the start of a season. Chris Bryant grieved that with the Chicago Cubs in 2015 because it happened to him, and then he won Rookie of the Year. The next year he won MVP when they won the World Series. I don't need to talk about where he is now, but it's kind of fallen off for him. But my point is, Griff, is that this has happened to players through the decades. They are shown by their bosses, the CEOs, the people running these teams, that it is a business. And George Kirby is running a business. He is in the business of making sure that he is healthy enough to eventually get paid so that he sets himself up and presumably the generations that will follow him up for life. I'm not defending him. It's an awful look. It's a bad look. And fans will side with ownership, not because they like billionaires. They'll side with ownership because, as Jerry Seinfeld likes to say, we cheer for laundry. Clothing with logos on it, with the city we like best, or the nickname of the team from the city we like best. With the hats that we buy, we cheer for the laundry. And George Kirby is showing us he's not 100% in on the team, or from a fan's perspective, the laundry. He's in business for himself, which really every player is and should be, because these teams will discard you like yesterday's muffins. Why am I thinking about the muffin tops on Seinfeld as I say it?
I knew you were.
Top of the muffin to you. But you get my point, Griff. I'm not siding with George Kirby, but the logic, if you're willing to follow it, is in place. I don't know. I don't like it, especially at this time of year with where his team is. You know, the Mariners are fighting for a playoff spot, but the logic is intact if you're willing to at least step back emotionally and take it in.
You talk about the players being the workers and it being a business. You know, the difference is that if you're a worker on Wall Street or on Bay Street or whatever,
you have no power.
You don't have media coming into your cubicle
well, that too. Yeah.
Right after you get pissed off at somebody and asking you a question. And to me, the DL, the IL, and the performance of pitchers and players in terms of being protected for their future is run by the Players Association and agents. And we talked about Scott Boris's many powerful agents. And you know, with the changes in medical help and conditioning and protection from within high performance organization, there should be no reason that back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, there were way fewer people going on the disabled list, the IL, than there are now. But the difference is the money in the future. And that's to your point. And even though I don't agree with you on some of your points, you are representing the workers of the world, and you must unite.
Yeah.
So there you go. But I think we're talking in pretty much the same area.
Griff, I didn't bring my sickle with me to Halifax. I do have a hammer back here somewhere. So if you could just ship it to me, that would be good.
I've heard you do. Anyway, I think we're winding this down. What do you got, Scotty?
Well, because we said we'd talk a little NFL here. So if I could just indulge myself for a moment here. Did my 49ers go to Pittsburgh and kick the Steelers in the junk in their own barn, or what?
Yeah, huh? I got Steelers in a team pool that I'm in, and by the end of the first quarter, I thought it was over. It was done. They weren't coming back against that Niner team.
The New York Giants got a dose of reality. The Cowboys, Cowboys and Eagles are the two best teams in the NFC East. And I think the Giants are in a weird spot because they outperformed expectations under Brian Daboll in his first year as head coach last year and made the playoffs. And that was kind of a fun year. I think they outperformed not only expectations, but how good they were. And this year could be a slight regression, even though they do have the right head coach, finally. So, but in New York, that's not going to play, especially when it happens against Dallas in your own barn on national television, Sunday Night Football in week 1, getting smacked 40-0. So I thought that was big. And of course, the Chiefs and Bengals are both 0-1. And wouldn't it be interesting? Buffalo goes into New York to play the Jets tonight. I'm cheering for Buffalo because unless Aaron Rodgers can help the 49ers by beating an NFC team, there's no chance in hell I'll ever cheer for that guy. So go Bills. But if the Bills lose, you got the Chiefs, the Bengals, and the Bills, arguably the three best teams in a stacked AFC at 0-1 to start the season.
Yeah, and you really have to watch NFL games to see what the reality is. I mean, if you look at stats from the Chiefs game on last Thursday, the opener, it looks like the quarterback was regressing. It wasn't very good. But then if you watch the game, you see the balls that bounce off receivers' hands. I mean, that one receiver was so bad. The 3 drop balls.
Kadarius Toney.
Yeah. That there's, even losing week 1, I'm sure there's some teams that are going to bounce back and still make the playoffs. And the Chiefs clearly are among that group. But Mahomes just didn't get any help in that first game. And that's another one of the teams I have in that same pool. So I pay attention to these things. But just in reference to what we were talking about with baseball players, how about the Ravens running back who was in the middle of negotiating for a long-term extension, and he
blew his wheel,
ACL or whatever, and he's out for
he blew his Achilles.
He blew his Achilles for the year. Yeah. So you got to take the money, get the money when you can. And I don't even think in the NFL it's as guaranteed as in baseball. Baseball, you sign a long-term deal. It's a guaranteed contract. You get all your money. It's a great union, best retirement plan in professional sports, in professional labor, as a matter of fact. And so we'll incorporate more NFL as the season winds down in baseball, as October turns into November, as the Blue Jays continue to play into October, as we're predicting here, or I am anyway, because of the stumbling of the West. So with that in mind, we're going to pay close attention to the Rangers series. We can talk about it next week on Exit Philosophy. I'll have something to say about it and something to write about it during the week on griffsthepitch.com. And what do you got to wrap it up?
Well, so this is how I just bear with me here. I'm going to make definitive statements. If the Blue Jays win this series, 3 out of 4 are sweep, I promise you they're in the playoffs. If they split, I still think they make it. If they lose the series, 3 out of 4, I'll be more concerned if they get swept for a variety of reasons, not just the standings and the math. But if they lose the series, I still think they will get in. But all of a sudden, it becomes really hairy. And the one thing, Griff, that I'm ready to see out of this team, and you were talking about an identity earlier, and the funny how April's top three, Springer, Bo, and Vladdy, are September's top three after all the lineup machinations throughout the season. It's a long year. It's time for this team to put the work in that gets the results that this does not need to be complicated. They have complicated a lot of things this year. Split at minimum. I don't need a sweep. 3 out of 4 is just fine. You win 3 out of 4, and in my view, you're going to the playoffs. Take care of business with the opponent right in front of you, the Texas Rangers, who matter to you most right now because of where both teams are in the standings. TCB, and it'll be okay.
And taking care of business with this Rangers team means staying even and staying competitive through the first 5 innings, because their rotation is far better than their bullpen. And that's an advantage that the Blue Jays have, is that the rotation and the bullpen are both pretty damn good. And that's their hope for the future. I mean, everyone thought that this would be an offensive first club and that Manoah would lead the rotation. And it hadn't turned out that way. So they do have an advantage pitching wise over the Rangers, and they just have to play 9 innings and go balls out and take 3 out of 4 so that they have the tiebreaker against the Rangers. And yeah, October will arrive and they'll still be playing.
Episode number 19 of Exit Philosophy in the books. griffsthepitch.com, where you can get all of Griff's work. Griff's smirking because he's listening to make sure I say every word in the same order as I always say it. griffsthepitch.com is where you can get all of Griff's catalog. That includes multiple Blue Jays and MLB columns each week, an MLB Power Rankings column on a weekly basis, exclusive conversations with some of the game's current and former greats, focusing on Blue Jays current and past, and former Montreal Expos. The Exit Philosophy podcast is also linked to griffsthepitch.com. If you listen to us, we should let you know we're also on YouTube at youtube.com/exitphilosophy. And if you watched us on YouTube, we're available audio wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, etc., etc., etc. Thank you for listening. We're back next Monday, and we'll chat then.